a whisper of something that seemed too trivial to matter. But hints, no matter how innocuous, have a way of festering in the mind if left unchecked. That's exactly what happened to me. My name is Ethan, and this is the story of how my life unraveled in ways I never thought possible. I was on one of those business trips that had become almost routine over the years. A quick flight out of Los Angeles, a whirlwind negotiation, and then back home to Bellevue where my wife, Claire, waited for me. Or so I thought. Before leaving, I gave her my usual detailed schedule. Flight times, meetings, everything she needed to know. It wasn't just habit, it was trust. We'd been married long enough that our lives ran like clockwork. She always knew where I was, and I always knew where she was. Or so I believed. By Thursday morning, the deal was done. The parties involved signed the contract, and I was whisked away to handle an emergency at one of our East Coast sites. Everything fell into place so suddenly that I barely had time to process it. I called Claire from the plane using the in-flight phone, eager to share the news of my early return. But when I reached her office, the receptionist informed me that Claire wasn't available. Her secretary, Jennifer, was also absent, a rare occurrence. Something didn't sit right. Jennifer practically lived at Claire's side, managing her calendar, fielding calls, and ensuring everything ran smoothly. The only times Jennifer wasn't there were when Claire was sick or when Jennifer herself had personal matters to attend to. Neither scenario made sense here. I tried calling Claire's cell phone next, but it went straight to voicemail. Odd. Very odd. When the plane touched down in Seattle at 6:35 p.m., I expected to find the house lit up, dinner waiting, and Claire greeting me with that warm smile of hers. Instead, I walked into darkness. No lights, no Claire. By 8 p.m., worry started gnawing at me. I paced the floor, trying her number again and again. Still nothing. Around 9:20 p.m., my phone finally rang. It was Claire. Relief washed over me until she spoke. Ethan, I was starting to wonder if something had gone wrong, she said, her voice tinged with unease. I called your hotel, and they told me you checked out. Are you okay? Her words felt rehearsed, distant. And then it hit me. She wasn't where she said she'd be. Something was very, very wrong. The conversation that followed haunted me. Claire claimed she'd spent the day at work, buried under client meetings and legal documents. She mentioned John, a colleague who had recently helped her navigate a tricky situation with the Melrose account. According to her, he'd saved her career, and now she owed him. Gratitude, she called it. But gratitude doesn't involve late-night absences, unanswered calls, or secrets whispered behind closed doors. As I hung up the phone, a cold realization settled over me. This wasn't just about today. There were signs I'd ignored, small things that seemed insignificant at the time, but now screamed betrayal. Like the weekends when Claire would disappear for hours, claiming she needed space to decompress after stressful weeks. Or the way she'd grown distant, distracted, as though her mind was constantly elsewhere. Even the little quirks in her behavior, the sudden interest in expensive jewelry, the unexplained charges on our credit card, all pointed to something deeper, darker. But what hurt most wasn't the cheating itself, it was the lie. Claire had promised me loyalty, fidelity, love. Yet here she was, giving pieces of herself to someone else while pretending everything was fine. How could she look me in the eye and say she loved me when she'd already given another man access to parts of her soul meant only for me? That night, sleep eluded me. Every creak of the house echoed louder than it should have. Every shadow seemed to mock me. I replayed memories of us, the laughter, the intimacy, the dreams we once shared, and wondered how much of it had been real. Had she ever truly loved me? Or was I just convenient, a placeholder until someone better came along? By morning, anger had replaced despair. Anger at Claire for betraying me. Anger at myself for not seeing it sooner. And anger at John, whoever he was, for thinking he could take what wasn't his. Because if there's one thing I learned that night, it's this: forgiveness isn't free. If Claire wanted redemption, she'd have to earn it. And if John thought he could walk away unscathed, he was dead wrong. The next morning, fueled by a mix of fury and determination, I decided to dig deeper. After retrieving contact information from Claire's workplace Rolodex, I set out in our dark green Explorer, a vehicle we rarely used unless heading into the mountains or towing the camping trailer. Leaving the Mercedes in the garage, I drove toward Claire's office in Bellevue, ensuring her gray BMW wasn't parked in the lot. It wasn't. My suspicions grew stronger. With heavy heart, I sought out the address listed for John Sticker in the upscale Medina region. Nestled in a wooded area, his property was encircled by an 8-foot red brick fence, tall fir trees casting long shadows across the driveway. As I slowly passed by, my eyes caught sight of Claire's BMW tucked beside the garage, hidden from view. Pulling over to the roadside, I sat there, vision blurring as emotions overwhelmed me. Taking a moment to compose myself, I wiped my eyes and continued onward. By the time I reached Bellevue for a quick pit stop, it was nearly brunch. Seated by 11:30, I ordered tea and a Belgian waffle, uncertain if I could stomach anything more substantial. Each bite was deliberate, each sip of tea measured, as I contemplated my next move. Returning to the road past Sticker's property, I drove slowly, noticing Claire's car still parked there. Anger and despair consumed me as I aimlessly drove for over an hour, passing Sticker's place again with no change. Her vehicle remained, a silent testament to her betrayal. Driving home, I pondered what had become of my marriage and the life I once cherished. Could I ever smile again? The rest of the day dragged on, filled with restless wandering around the house. Rather than cook dinner, I opted for snacks, fruit drinks, and colas to numb the odd hunger sensations gnawing at me. At 9:45, just as I was preparing for bed, my phone rang. It was Claire again, griping about the spaciousness and loneliness of their bed without me. Attempting to sound non-confrontational, I grumbled and told her I understood how lonely a bed that huge might feel. Confused, she asked what I meant, but I dismissed it, confessing my love for her before hanging up. Lying awake, staring at the ceiling, I realized Claire wasn't returning home anytime soon. My thoughts spiraled, imagining scenarios where revenge played out in vivid detail. By 7 a.m., wide awake and planning my day, I resolved to confront the truth head-on, determined to uncover the extent of Claire's infidelity and exact justice. Sunday morning arrived with a suffocating tension that clung to the air like a storm cloud refusing to break. I sat in the living room, shades drawn, lights off, waiting. The clock ticked past 10, and then I heard it, the faint hum of Claire's BMW pulling into the garage. Moments later, she entered through the kitchen door, carrying a small overnight bag. Her sleeveless red blouse shimmered under the dim light filtering through the curtains, and the necklace I'd gifted her on our 3rd anniversary glinted around her neck. She looked refreshed, almost radiant, as she moved about the kitchen. But her calm demeanor shattered when she noticed the chaos I'd left behind. Dirty dishes stacked in the sink, glasses unwashed, and the teapot warming water on the stove. She froze, her gaze darting nervously around the room. Slowly, she crept through the kitchen, checking corners, examining the closed drapes framing the patio doors. When she picked up the fireplace poker, I leaned back in my chair, sipping tea, and let my presence register. "Oh my goodness, Ethan, you scared me." Her voice trembled, laced with guilt and surprise. "When did you get back?" I asked, my tone flat, drained of energy. "A couple of days ago," she replied, sinking into the wingback chair opposite me. "Why didn't you call? Where have you been staying?" I tried calling Thursday afternoon, but you weren't home, and Jennifer wasn't at the office." I set my teacup down, letting silence stretch between us. Finally, I spoke. "Susan, can you make me understand what happened?" Her hands flew to her face, trembling. Tears spilled over as she choked out, "Ethan, I love you. This had nothing to do with you, with us. Please try to understand. It was something I felt I had to do. Cheating on me has nothing to do with us." My voice rose, sharp and incredulous. "You gave yourself to another man, Susan. Did you beg him to take it? Was it meaningless to you?" "No, it didn't mean anything," she cried, shaking her head. "I'm still all here. Nothing in me has changed. I love you totally. I'm yours. And yet you gave yourself away so easily." I shot back, my voice quivering with rage. "How many nights were you with him, Susan? Just those 2? Or are there more?" She collapsed into herself, sobbing uncontrollably. Hours passed in silence, broken only by the distant sounds of children playing outside and the ticking of the mantel clock. In the days that followed, I devised a plan. I wouldn't stoop to their level. I'd rise above it. Using connections from my professional network, I uncovered John's vulnerabilities. A gambling addiction he kept hidden, mounting debts, and a reputation built on shaky foundations. With calculated precision, I orchestrated his downfall. Anonymous tips led to investigations, exposing his unethical practices at work. Within months, he lost his job, his credibility, and eventually his marriage. As for Claire, I gave her a choice: leave quietly or face public humiliation. She chose the former, disappearing from my life as quickly as she betrayed me. Months later, standing on the terrace of our empty home, I realized something profound. Revenge hadn't healed me. It had taught me resilience. Life moves forward, even when hearts are broken. And sometimes, the greatest act of vengeance is reclaiming your own peace. The terrace was unseasonably warm for a Saturday afternoon, the kind of warmth that clung to your skin and made the air feel heavier than it should. Ethan stood there, gripping the railing, as if it were the only thing keeping him grounded. Behind him, Susan's sobs echoed through the glass doors like a haunting melody he couldn't escape. Each cry felt like a knife twisting deeper into his chest, but he didn't turn back. He couldn't. Not yet. He replayed their conversation in his mind, dissecting every word she had said, every justification she had offered. It had nothing to do with you, she'd insisted, over and over again. But how could it not? Intimacy wasn't just physical. It was emotional, spiritual, a sacred bond meant to be shared with one person and one person alone. And now, that bond lay shattered at his feet, irreparably broken by her choices. What stung most was the casualness with which she spoke about it. She hadn't planned this betrayal out of malice or spite. No, it was worse than that. It was an act born of convenience, gratitude even. John Snurr, the man who had saved her bacon during the Melrose account fiasco, was someone she felt indebted to. In her mind, giving herself to him was repayment for his help. To Ethan, it sounded absurd, almost laughable, if it weren't so devastating. But beneath the anger and hurt, another emotion began to surface: pity. Not for Susan, but for himself. How had they drifted so far apart that she no longer valued what they once shared? When had their love become so fragile that she could toss it aside so easily? These questions gnawed at him, leaving him hollow. Inside the house, Susan sat hunched in the wingback chair, her arms wrapped tightly around herself, as though trying to hold herself together. Her tears had slowed, but her breathing remained uneven, punctuated by occasional gasps. She stared at the floor, unable to meet Ethan's eyes when he finally returned from the terrace. "I'm sorry," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "I never meant to hurt you." Ethan stopped mid-step, his jaw tightening. "Then why did you?" he asked, his tone sharp enough to cut glass. "If you didn't mean to hurt me, why didn't you stop yourself? Why didn't you think about us before you gave yourself to him?" Susan flinched at his words, her shoulders trembling. "I don't know," she admitted, her voice cracking. I thought I was doing the right thing. For both of us." "For both of us?" Ethan repeated, incredulous. "How does betraying me benefit either of us?" "You don't get to rewrite reality, Susan. What you did, it's not something we can just brush under the rug and move on from. Trust doesn't work that way." She nodded slowly, her face pale and drawn. "I understand," she said softly. "I know I messed up. I'll do whatever it takes to fix this, to make things right between us." Ethan crossed the room and sank into the chair opposite her, leaning forward with his elbows on his knees. His gaze bore into hers, searching for some sign of sincerity, some flicker of remorse beyond the surface-level apologies. "Do you even realize what you're saying?" he asked. "You can't fix this overnight. This isn't a flat tire or a leaky faucet. This is our marriage, our lives. If we want to salvage anything from this wreckage, it's going to take time. A lot of it, and effort, from both of us." Susan swallowed hard, her hands twisting nervously in her lap. "I'm willing to try," she said, her voice steadier now. "Whatever it takes." Ethan exhaled sharply, running a hand through his hair. "We'll see," he muttered, more to himself than to her. "For now, let's focus on surviving tonight. Tomorrow we'll figure out the next step." As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across the living room, Ethan retreated to the guest bedroom. The space felt foreign, sterile, a stark contrast to the comfort and familiarity of the master suite. He lay awake for hours, staring at the ceiling, his mind racing with thoughts of the future. Could they really rebuild what had been lost? Or was this the beginning of the end? Down the hall, Susan curled up on the edge of their king-size bed, clutching a pillow to her chest. Tears streamed silently down her cheeks as she replayed the day's events in her head. She had known Ethan would be angry, but she hadn't anticipated the depth of his pain or the emptiness in his eyes when he looked at her. For the first time, she truly understood the magnitude of what she had done. Outside, the neighborhood hummed with life. Children laughed as they chased each other through sprinklers, dogs barked playfully in backyards, and couples strolled hand in hand along tree-lined streets. Inside the Conroy household, however, silence reigned supreme, a heavy, suffocating quiet that pressed down on them both like a storm cloud refusing to break. For now, they were stuck in limbo, caught between the ruins of their past and the uncertain promise of a future neither of them could fully envision. But one thing was clear. Whether they chose to fight for their marriage or walk away for good, nothing would ever be the same again.